Every morning, the same shiny red Porsche sat in my parking spot like a royal throne mocking me. The sun would hit its sleek curves, gleaming in the daylight as if it belonged there, even though it didn't. I had lived in this neighborhood for 5 peaceful years before the HOA president, Karen, and her spoiled son, Tyler, moved in. From the very first day, she made it clear that she ran this place. Her son, a 25-year-old brat with a trust fund and zero respect, he'd park his Porsche across 2 spaces, mine included, then stroll away with his sunglasses on and a smirk that made my blood boil at first. I tried being polite, notes on his windshield.com conversations, even a call to the HOA, but guess who dismissed every complaint? His mom. You'll have to be patient, she'd say with that fake smile. Tyler's young. He'll learn. He never did. Each day, the Porsche blocked my spot like a middle finger to my patience. The final straw came one bright Saturday morning when I was late for work, and there it was again, parked perfectly across my line. My car sat useless at the curb while his luxury toy took my space. That was the day I decided enough was enough. If Karen and her son thought they could play dirty, I'd show them what real consequences looked like. The sun shone brighter than ever as I made my plan simple, smart, and utterly devastating. They wanted to play games with pot. I was about to end it permanently. The morning sun poured through my kitchen window, painting long streaks of gold across the floor as I stirred my coffee. The air was quiet, the kind of peaceful calm I used to love about this neighborhood before Karen and her son moved in. For 5 years, my mornings had been predictable and easy. I'd sip my coffee, grab my briefcase, and head to work. But lately, the first thing I saw when I stepped outside wasn't the clear blue sky or my tidy driveway. It was that bright red Porsche parked arrogantly in my spot. It sat there again today, its glossy paint glinting like a mirror, mocking me. The car was a symbol of everything wrong with its owner. Flashy, careless, and utterly disrespectful. It wasn't even parked straight. Half the car rested in my assigned space, the other half sprawled across the yellow line. It was as if Tyler Karen's son deliberately positioned it to send a message. I can do whatever I want. I stood there, coffee in hand, taking a deep breath to calm the irritation rising inside me. Maybe he'd just be gone in an hour, I told myself. Maybe this time it was an accident. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Tyler had been parking like this for weeks, and each time my patience thinned a little more. The first time it happened, I'd left a polite note on his windshield. "Hi, this is my assigned parking spot. Could you please park in your own space? Thanks." The next morning, the note was gone. The car was still there, and a smear of gum was stuck under my door handle. Coincidence? Maybe, but I doubted it. I'd tried being calm and civil. I'd even spoken to his mother Karen, the self-proclaimed HOA president, though she acted more like the queen of a very small kingdom. When I'd knocked on her door the first time, she greeted me with that sugary smile that made my skin crawl. "Oh, hi there," she had said, leaning against the doorframe in her crisp white blouse and oversized sunglasses. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," I'd replied, forcing politeness. "Your son has been parking in my spot. Could you please ask him to move his car?" Her smile didn't falter for a second. "Oh, Tyler probably just didn't notice the markings. Boys can be so careless." I'll remind him. I wanted to believe her. But Tyler kept parking there. Day after day, the Porsche gleamed in my spot, a red reminder of my powerlessness. I had complained to the HOA board, but Karen was quick to dismiss every complaint. "I'll handle it internally," she told me one evening, her tone sharp behind the fake smile. No need to escalate something so minor. Minor. That word stuck with me. It wasn't minor when I had to park 2 blocks away and carry groceries in the heat. It wasn't minor when I had to explain to delivery drivers that I didn't have parking access to my own home. It wasn't minor when every small attempt at civility was met with arrogance and laughter that morning. I decided to confront Tyler directly. The neighborhood was alive with weekend energy. Sprinklers hissed across manicured lawns. Kids rode bikes on the sidewalks, and dogs barked in the distance. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and car wax. Tyler was outside, leaning against his Porsche with his sunglasses perched on his head, chatting loudly on his phone. He looked up when he saw me walking toward him, smirked, and lowered his sunglasses. "Morning," he said lazily, not moving an inch. "Morning," I replied curtly. "You're parked in my spot again," he shrugged. "Oh yeah, the one with the faded paint. I didn't see your name on it." "It's assigned," I said firmly. "It's been my spot for years. You've been told before." Tyler chuckled, a dry, mocking laugh. "You sound like my mom." "I don't care who I sound like," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Move your car." He smiled wider, leaning off the hood. "You could always park on the street. There's space down the block. That's not the point." He tilted his head, pretending to think. "You're right," he said finally, grinning. "The point is, it's just a parking spot. Don't be so uptight." Then he climbed into his Porsche, revved the engine obnoxiously, and rather than moving out, shifted it slightly further into my space. He waved at me through the window before driving off slowly, leaving a trail of laughter and exhaust behind him. I stood there for a long moment, gripping my keys tightly, my jaw locked. The sunlight felt harsher now, burning against my skin. I could feel neighbors' eyes from nearby porches, pretending not to watch but definitely witnessing the scene. I didn't want to be the neighborhood complainer, but I also wasn't going to be a doormat. I took out my phone and began snapping photos, clear ones, from multiple angles. If the HOA wouldn't listen to words, maybe they'd listen to evidence. I documented the space markings, the car's license plate, even the timestamp on my phone. Then I wrote another formal complaint and emailed it to the board. This time, I copied everyone except Karen. That afternoon, I saw her marching toward me with her signature wide-brimmed hat and a clipboard tucked under her arm. "Really?" she said sharply. "You're sending complaints to the board now?" I folded my arms. "I've tried talking to you. Nothing's changed." She gave a tight laugh. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. Tyler's just learning to live independently. I won't have you harassing my son over a painted line." I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. Respecting other people's property isn't harassment. It's called decency. Her smile faded then, replaced by a look of pure irritation. "You should be careful," she said quietly. "People who make noise in this neighborhood tend to find themselves isolated." It wasn't a threat, not directly, but it was enough. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the pavement, her clipboard swinging like a gavel of judgment. That night, I moved my car to a nearby street. It was inconvenient, but at least it was safe from Tyler's games. As I locked my door and looked back at my assigned spot still occupied by that shiny Porsche, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't lose this war, not to an entitled boy and his manipulative mother. The morning sun the next day revealed the same scene. The Porsche sitting smugly in place, Tyler nowhere to be seen, and my patience dangling by a thread. But this time, something felt different. I wasn't angry. I was focused, calm. Because now, I knew exactly what I had to do. That parking spot wasn't just a patch of pavement anymore. It was my line in the sand, and I was done letting anyone cross it. The next week felt like an endless test of patience. Each morning I woke up just hoping that maybe this time Tyler would do the right thing. But every day, the same scene greeted me. His flashy red Porsche gleaming in the morning sun, parked squarely in my spot like it belonged there. Sometimes he angled it just enough to block both my space and half of the next one, as if he wanted to make sure no one could ignore him. The arrogance in that simple act made my blood boil at first. I still tried to handle it the right way. I kept taking photos and videos for proof. I dated every image and logged every complaint I sent to the HOA board. I even printed the rules from the HOA handbook that clearly stated every resident must park in their assigned space. I knew I was in the right, but it didn't seem to matter. Karen, of course, kept brushing me off. Every time I passed her during the day, she gave me that smug little smile that said I controlled this place. One morning, she even waved at me cheerfully as she backed her SUV out of her driveway. "Good morning," she called out in that fake sweet tone. "Oh, I see Tyler parked again. Boys, right?" I clenched my teeth but forced a smile. "Right," I said flatly. Behind her sunglasses, I could practically feel her eyes laughing. She knew exactly what she was doing, enabling her son to make my life miserable while pretending it was all harmless fun. By the third day of that week, I started to notice the pattern. Tyler would leave his Porsche in my spot every morning, then drive off around noon, usually after I'd already left for work. He knew my schedule. He knew I couldn't always wait around to confront him. He was doing it on purpose. That realization made something inside me snap a little. This wasn't just inconsiderate behavior anymore. It was targeted. He was taunting me, so I decided to play the long game. If Karen and her spoiled son wanted to act like this neighborhood was their kingdom, I'd use their own rules against them. The next morning I stood outside with my phone ready. The sun was rising, the air warm and still. I could hear the faint hum of the Porsche before I saw it. Tyler rolled into the lot like a movie star, one arm resting on the door, music blasting from his speakers. He pulled halfway into my space, then stopped, glancing at me. When he saw me standing there, he grinned. "Morning," he said, cutting the engine. I forced a calm tone. "Don't park there," he shrugged. "Relax, I'll only be an hour." "You've said that before," I replied. He climbed out, adjusted his sunglasses, and smirked. "You should really learn to chill. It's not like the world's ending because of a parking spot." I wanted to yell. I wanted to tell him how disrespectful and arrogant he was. But instead, I smiled just slightly. "You're right," I said. "The world's not ending, but something else might." He raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked away. That day I spent my lunch break at the public library, digging through city ordinances and parking enforcement laws. It turned out there were very clear rules about unauthorized parking even on private property. If a vehicle was parked in a reserved space without permission, it could be towed after proper documentation and notice. The trick was to make sure the report didn't go through the HOA, since Karen would obviously block it. So I made a few phone calls. First to the city parking enforcement department, then to a towing company. I asked polite, innocent questions, purely hypothetical of course. By the end of the day, I knew exactly what steps I'd need to take. I wasn't going to break any laws. I was just going to use them. That evening, I saw Tyler and his friends gathered near the driveway, laughing loudly as they leaned against his Porsche. I overheard bits of their conversation. Dude, one of them said, "That guy's losing it. You should just park across his driveway next time." Tyler laughed. "Maybe I will. What's he gonna do, call my mum?" They all burst out laughing. I stood behind my curtain, watching through the blinds, my fists clenched at my sides. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was determined. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun had barely risen when I stepped outside, camera ready. Tyler's Porsche was already there, of course, sparkling in the soft morning light. The dew on its hood caught the sunlight like tiny diamonds. It looked so pristine, so untouchably and so infuriatingly out of place in my spot. I took more pictures, recorded a short video, and then went back inside. My evidence folder was full now, timestamps, photos, messages, everything. I compiled it all into one clean document and sent it to every HOA board member except Karen. 2 days later, I got a reply. "Thank you for the detailed documentation." The message read, "This is clearly a violation of our community policy. We'll bring this to a vote at the next board meeting." That was the first small victory I'd had in weeks, but as satisfying as it was, it didn't stop the daily frustration. Karen must have caught wind of my message, because the next morning she stopped me on my way to work. Her voice was sharp this time, not fake sweet anymore. "I know you've been sending complaints to the board behind my back," she snapped. I kept walking. "Then you know why. You're making things worse for yourself," she warned. "Tyler's not doing anything wrong. You're overreacting." I stopped and turned toward her. "Blocking my assigned parking spot for weeks isn't wrong. Ignoring multiple complaints isn't wrong. You're the HOA president who is supposed to enforce the rules, not protect your son from them." Her face flushed red. "You should remember who manages this neighborhood," she said quietly. "If you keep causing trouble, maybe the board will reconsider your place here." That was the moment I realized she wasn't just entitled, she was dangerous in her own way. She thought fear and intimidation would keep people quiet. Maybe it had worked before, but not with me. The next few days were oddly quiet. Tyler's car still blocked my spot, but he avoided eye contact. Maybe Karen had told him to lay low. Still, I could feel their eyes on me whenever I walked by one afternoon. I saw Tyler outside washing his Porsche, water glistening off its curves under the afternoon sun. His friends were gone this time. I watched from my porch as he carefully polished the car, completely absorbed in his reflection. For a moment, I almost felt pity for him, a grown man whose only pride came from a piece of metal. But then he looked up, smirked, and deliberately splashed soapy water toward my driveway. "Better get used to walking," he said under his breath. That was it, the final straw. I smiled, not out of anger this time, but with quiet resolve. I'd been patient long enough. The game he and his mother had been playing was about to end, and I was going to make sure it ended on my terms. As the sun dipped lower, I stood at my window, staring at that Porsche shining proudly in my parking spot. Tomorrow, it would still be there, but not for long. I already had the plan forming in my head, and soon, Tyler would learn that some people aren't as powerless as they seem. The morning was bright and ordinary, the kind of clear day that usually made small annoyances feel trivial. Birds called from the maple trees and sunlight spilled over the pavement, turning dew into a scatter of tiny diamonds. But the ordinary calm of the neighborhood felt different to me now. Everything seemed charged, as if the air itself was waiting for whatever came next. I poured my coffee slowly, watching steam curl up in the sunlight, and thought through the plan one more time. I had no desire to hurt anyone, and I refused to stoop to petty cruelty. All I wanted was to reclaim what was mine, my parking spot, my dignity, my right to come and go without being mocked by a shiny hood and an entitled smirk. Tyler's Porsche was already in place when I stepped outside. It looked ridiculous sitting there, perfectly polished, as though it were posing for a magazine. He was nowhere near it. That had become his pattern: part early, be gone during the day, return in the late afternoon for dramatic effect. If his goal was to make my life difficult, he was succeeding. If his goal was to appear untouchable, I intended to show him how fragile appearances could be. I started by talking to people, not loud, not accusing, just honest conversations with neighbors who'd watched the same pattern unfold. Mrs. Alvarez, 2 houses down, remembered when a similar problem had been solved the correct way. Clear documentation, witnesses, and formal complaints placed with the proper authorities. Mr. Singh across the street, who'd served on the board years ago, listened and offered neighborhood history and names of people who might back me up at a hearing. These were not dramatic alliances. They were quiet, practical steps. I wasn't planning sabotage or revenge theatrics. I was lining up the facts. I spent the morning collecting those facts. I took photographs from different angles, careful only to show what was visible from public and shared spaces. I respected privacy and knew the difference between proving a pattern and invading someone's life. I compiled dates, times, and brief notes on conversations I'd had with Tyler and Karen, where neighbors were willing. I asked them to sign a short statement saying they had observed the car occupying my assigned space repeatedly. Most agreed without hesitation. Enough people were tired of Karen's attitude to want fairness restored. By midday, my folder felt heavier. Not heavy in paper, but heavy in the sense of responsibility. I could have let this be a personal grudge. I could have given up and pretended it didn't matter. But the support I'd found in small acts, Mrs. Alvarez's sympathetic nod, Mr. Singh's brief handshake made it clear that this wasn't simply about me. It was about a community standard. If one resident could ignore rules with impunity, the whole neighborhood's sense of order would slowly erode. I emailed the compiled evidence to the HOA board and, this time, to the city parking enforcement office as well. The messages were calm and factual. I avoided emotional language because facts were harder to dismiss. I described the repeated misuse of my assigned space and attached a photographic timeline. In the body of the email I explained how past complaints within the HOA had not been addressed, and requested guidance on how to proceed under municipal rules. Sending the emails felt like releasing a breath I'd been holding for weeks. The world didn't end. The sun still shone. But something had changed. I had moved beyond complaint into action. Through the proper channels while I waited for a response, I kept living. Daylight gave the world a way to see what was happening. Neighbors could witness the truth plainly. That afternoon, Tyler returned, music low in his car, sunglasses on. He saw me on the porch and gave that familiar half-smile of someone who assumed he held the upper hand. I kept my expression neutral and went about watering my small front garden. He circled the Porsche nonchalantly, dismissive, checking his phone as though my very existence wasn't worth a real look. It would have been easy to shout, to make a scene. Instead, I walked over and asked, politely, "Are you aware that this spot is assigned to me?" He muttered something about it being fine and moved on. A few hours later, the city's parking enforcement replied. Their tone was formal but receptive. They confirmed receipt of my documentation and said they would review and advise on next steps. Simultaneously, the HOA board scheduled a brief meeting to discuss parking policy enforcement and invited board members and concerned residents to attend. I felt the tension in my chest ease a little. The process was slow, but it was moving the right direction. That evening, word had traveled quietly through the neighborhood that the board would address the issue. Conversations buzzed in small clusters, practical, not vindictive. Some residents asked what they could do: sign statements, attend the meeting, keep records. Others offered more mundane help, like watching out for the car and noting times. I accepted each offer with a short, sincere thank you. There was a comfort in collective action. It reminded me why people lived in these small, shared spaces in the first place. On the morning of the meeting, sunlight warmed the pavement and a gentle breeze moved the leaves. I arrived early and set my folder on a chair, my hands steady despite a restless excitement. The HOA room filled gradually. Neighbors, a couple of board members, and finally Karen, who swept in with the confidence of someone convinced she could charm or command her way through anything. Tyler was noticeably absent. Maybe he'd been told to stay away. Maybe he simply didn't care. Karen took a seat and shot me a look that tried to carry menace, but there was a thinness to it. The room smelled faintly of coffee and the institutional paper of minutes and agendas. When the issue came up, I presented calmly. I spoke about the pattern one had documented, about how repeated incidents had forced me to park away from my home and how previous attempts at resolution had been ignored. I didn't accuse. I laid out the facts and asked for enforcement of the rules that were supposed to apply to everyone. The room listened. A few heads nodded. Mr. Singh spoke up with quiet authority about precedent and fairness. Mrs. Alvarez added a short remark about community standards. No one cheered or jeered. The tone was resolute, measured. That Karen tried to deflect, accusing me of making a mountain out of a molehill, of being petty. She attempted the old move complaint about making trouble and suggested I was upsetting neighborhood harmony. But the board, now faced with clear documentation and multiple witnesses, didn't have room for the same evasions. One of the board members suggested a simple, enforceable step: formal notice to be issued to the vehicle owner and unresolved enforcement through towing under municipal code. It wasn't dramatic. It was the sober machinery of rules being set in motion. Walking out of the meeting into bright daylight felt like stepping into a different atmosphere. There was no vindictive glee in my only relief, tempered by the knowledge that processes can be slow and that people sometimes find ways to resist. Karen lingered in the doorway, her expression a mix of anger and calculation. She mouthed something I couldn't quite make out and then left with the same clipped composure she'd always used. I wasn't naive. I understood she might retaliate socially or sweep things under the rug later. But for that moment, there was a small victory in the communal sense. The right steps had been taken by the right authorities, and the neighborhood had shown it would not simply bend to one family's whims. The day ended with the ordinary rhythms of life: kids playing until the sun dipped a bit lower, sprinklers, cycling, neighbors calling out greetings. Tyler's Porsche remained in its place that afternoon, but it no longer felt untouchable. The sunlight that had once seemed to glamorize the car now simply illuminated the facts for anyone willing to see. I felt something like peace settle in, not because the war was won, but because the rules that governed shared life were for once being honored. I went inside, closed my door, and sat for a while with my coffee cooling beside me. I wasn't done. There would be more steps, and perhaps setbacks, but the plan was in motion, steady and legal. driven by documentation and community support rather than anger and impulse. In the glow of the afternoon, that felt like enough. The morning after the HOA meeting felt different. The sunlight didn't sting the same way it used to when it hit the bright red Porsche sitting in my parking spot. Instead, it seemed to highlight the cracks forming in Karen and Tyler's perfect little bubble. For the first time, I felt a quiet sense of control. The complaints, the documentation, and the evidence everything I had worked for was finally starting to matter. The HOA board had officially approved enforcement measures. The next time Tyler parked in my spot, the city would be notified, and towing would follow. I didn't have to wait long. That Friday morning, I opened my curtains and saw it again, Tyler's Porsche sitting boldly in my parking space. He'd done it deliberately, of course. Maybe he didn't think the HOA would follow through. Maybe his mother had assured him she'd take care of it like always. But this time was different. The board had already sent written notice to every resident, and city enforcement had been copied on it. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the rule. Everyone except the two people who thought they were above it. I stood outside for a moment, letting the morning air calm me. The neighborhood was bright and still, birds hopping across lawns, a lawnmower humming somewhere down the street, the scent of fresh-cut grass filling the air. Across the road, Mrs. Alvarez was watering her roses. She met my eyes, nodded once, and smiled faintly. It was a small acknowledgement, but it meant everything. I wasn't alone anymore. I made the call. Within half an hour, a large white tow truck rolled down the street. Its orange lights blinked in the sunlight as it slowed in front of my driveway. The driver, a tall man with a clipboard and calm expression, stepped out and surveyed the Porsche. "This the one?" he asked. "Yes," I said simply. He checked his paperwork. "City authorization, HOA notice, and private property order all here," he confirmed. "This'll take about 10 minutes. Neighbors began to appear on porches, pretending to sweep or collect mail. I could feel their quiet curiosity, their hidden satisfaction. They had all endured years of Karen's control, and this was the first time someone had managed to stand up to her successfully. The tow truck driver moved efficiently, looping heavy metal chains around the Porsche's wheels and sliding the lift beneath it. The sound of the machinery echoed through the quiet street. The Porsche tilted upward, helpless, its polished body now looking oddly fragile against the bright daylight. I didn't smile, but there was a certain justice in watching it happen. Halfway through, a voice screeched from across the street. "What do you think you're doing?" Karen came running down her driveway, phone in hand, sunglasses pushed up on her head. Her voice was sharp and shrill, cutting through the calm air like glass. "That's private property. You can't just take it." The driver didn't even flinch. "Ma'am, this vehicle is parked in violation of HOA and city regulations. You'll need to contact the impound office if you have concerns. You can't touch that car." She yelled again, now red-faced. "That's my son's Porsche." "Then your son should have parked it legally," I said quietly. Karen's head snapped toward me, fury flashing in her eyes. "You did this," she hissed. "You've been plotting this from the beginning." "I followed the rules," I replied calmly. "Something you were supposed to do." Her expression twisted in anger, but before she could reply, the tow truck began to pull away. The Porsche lifted high. The metallic clank of the chains and the steady hum of the engine filled the silence. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, some pretending not to stare, others openly smiling. The mighty Porsche, the neighborhood's symbol of arrogance, was being hauled away in broad daylight. Karen stood frozen for a moment, then turned and stormed back to her house, muttering something into her phone. I suspected she was calling Tyler. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 20 minutes later, the distant roar of a motorcycle broke the quiet. Tyler came speeding into the neighborhood, his helmet barely strapped on, fury written across his face. He stopped abruptly in front of my house, ripped off his helmet, and glared at me. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted. "Your car was parked illegally," I said evenly. "It's been towed. You can get it back after paying the fines and fees." He stepped closer, his fists clenched. "You think this is funny?" "I think it's fair," I said for a moment. I thought he might actually swing at me, but then he spotted the small crowd of neighbors gathering around. Whispers spread quickly. Someone was already filming on their phone. Tyler realized that any outburst now would only make him look worse. He turned sharply, swore under his breath, and stormed off toward his house. I heard him slam the door so hard the windows rattled. By noon, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with the story. Some pretended to be shocked. Most were quietly pleased. The HOA board sent a brief notice confirming the enforcement action and reminding everyone of the parking rules. Karen, however, sent her own angry message, accusing me of harassment and unlawful interference. It didn't matter, the board replied publicly, citing policy and proof. For once, her power was slipping through her fingers. That afternoon, as I sat on my porch sipping iced tea, Karen appeared again, this time quieter. The fury was gone, replaced by something else: humiliation. "You've made a mistake," she said coldly. "The board may have backed you now, but things change. People forget." I set down my glass and looked at her evenly. "I don't need people to remember me," I said. "I just need them to remember the rules." She didn't reply. She just turned and walked away, shoulders stiff, voice trembling with unspoken rage. Later that evening, I saw Tyler outside on his phone, pacing beside his mother's SUV. His Porsche was gone, and from the expression on his face, it wasn't coming back easily. Rumor had it that it had been impounded with several unpaid tickets tied to his name. Between the fines, towing fees, and previous violations, the car wasn't worth the cost to retrieve. The city was preparing to auction it off as scrap if the payment wasn't made within 30 days. I didn't rejoice when I heard that. I didn't gloat or celebrate. I simply felt ... peace. For weeks I'd lived with the constant weight of irritation and helplessness. Every time I looked out my window and saw that Porsche in my space, it felt like a reminder that people like Karen and Tyler could trample over anyone and get away with it. But watching that tow truck drive away under the warm sun had changed something. Justice didn't have to be loud or cruel, it could be simple, calm, and final. As evening settled and the light softened across the neighborhood, I took one last look at my now empty parking spot. The pavement looked cleaner somehow, brighter without that arrogant red car sitting there. The air was still, peaceful again. Kids rode bikes past my house waving. Mrs. Alvarez smiled from her porch. Even Karen's house was quiet. For the first time in months, I parked my car exactly where it belonged, right in my own spot, under the fading sunlight. When I turned off the engine, I sat for a long moment, feeling the calm silence of victory, not the kind of victory that shouts, but the kind that restores balance. And as the last rays of daylight brushed over the pavement, I knew the Porsche might have been gone, but the lesson it left behind would stay with all of us. The following week unfolded in an almost eerie calm. The sun still rose over the neat row of houses. The same breeze still carried the faint scent of trimmed grass and morning dew, but the air somehow felt cleaner, lighter. The Porsche was gone for good, and with it, the heavy tension that had clung to the neighborhood for months. Each morning now began with the simple, satisfying act of walking out my front door and seeing my parking spot empty and waiting my space, rightfully mine. No arguments, no smirks, no passive-aggressive notes, just quiet order, as it should have always been. The first few days after the towing, Karen and Tyler kept to themselves. Her once constant HOA patrols had stopped. The clipboard and fake smile had vanished along with her confidence. Neighbors whispered that she'd lost the HOA presidency after the board voted for a temporary suspension while they reviewed her conduct. Tyler, meanwhile, had become a ghost of his former self. No more loud music, no friends coming over to mock the rules, no Porsche gleaming under the sun like a trophy. Instead, a small, dented sedan sat crookedly in their driveway. Its dull gray paint, a humbling contrast to the bright red sports car he'd once flaunted. It was strange, watching them fade into the background. For so long they'd been the center of attention, loud, controlling, impossible to ignore. Now, they were just ... quiet. On some mornings I'd see Karen through her window, staring out blankly at the street, her posture slumped. There was no satisfaction in seeing her broken pride, only a sense of finality. Maybe, in her own way, she'd finally realized that power built on arrogance never lasts. The rest of the neighborhood seemed to breathe again. People smiled more freely, stopped to chat without glancing nervously toward Karen's house. Mrs. Alvarez started a small garden club. Mr. Singh volunteered to help repaint the faded parking lines on the street. Even the HOA meetings, once a stage for Karen's monologues, had turned into calm cooperative gatherings. The rules still mattered, but now, they were enforced fairly. For me, life returned to a peaceful rhythm. I'd park in my spot every evening, step out of my car, and watch the sunlight fade across the pavement. That small act, parking where I belonged, had become a daily reminder that standing up for yourself doesn't always require shouting or fighting. Sometimes it just means refusing to be stepped on, no matter how small the issue seems. One Saturday morning, about 2 weeks after the tow, I was washing my car when Tyler walked over. It was the first time he'd spoken to me since the incident. He looked different, less confident, more human. His usual smirk was gone, replaced with an awkward stiffness. He scratched the back of his neck, eyes flicking nervously toward the pavement. "Hey," he said finally. I wanted to say sorry." I paused, the hose still running in my hand. "For what, exactly?" I asked, not unkindly. "For being a jerk," he said, looking down. "I shouldn't have parked in your spot. I thought it didn't matter, you know. I thought my mom would handle everything like she always does. I didn't realize how stupid I was until I lost the car." His voice cracked slightly, and for the first time, I saw not the spoiled kid who had tormented me, but a young man who'd finally been forced to grow up. I nodded slowly. "Apology accepted," I said. "I just hope you learned something from it." He nodded. "Yeah, I did." He hesitated, then added, "We're thinking of selling the house. Mom doesn't want to stay here anymore." "I understand," I said. "I hope things get better for you both." He managed a small, grateful smile before turning to leave. As he walked away, I felt no anger, no resentment, just closure. Karen never spoke to me again. A for sale sign went up in their yard a month later, the red letters glaring in the sunlight. When the moving truck finally arrived, I watched from my porch as they packed up the last of their boxes. Karen stood by the curb for a moment, staring down the street she'd once ruled, her face unreadable. She caught my eye briefly, then turned away without a word. By the end of that day, they were gone. The neighborhood threw a small block party the next weekend, a symbolic celebration of sorts. The atmosphere was light, filled with laughter and the smell of barbecue. Children rode their bikes up and down the street. Chalk drawings covered the sidewalk, and music floated through the air. For the first time in a long while, the community felt united again. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I sat with a cold drink in hand, watching everyone mingle. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, casting a soft glow across the clean pavement. When I looked over at my driveway, my car sat neatly in its spot, shining under the warm light. It seemed so simple, yet so deeply symbolic, a small victory that had restored not just my peace, but the neighborhood's balance. Sometimes, I thought about how close I'd come to giving up. It would have been easier to move away, to let Karen and Tyler continue their reign of arrogance. But something inside me refused. And now, standing in the glow of this calm evening, surrounded by laughter and peace, I knew it had been worth it. Justice didn't need to be loud. It didn't need to be cruel. It just needed to be steady, fair, and patient. Weeks later, when the new neighbors moved into Karen's old house, quiet, kind couple with 2 little kids, I walked over to introduce myself. They smiled warmly and thanked me for welcoming them. As their children played on the sidewalk, the husband looked around and said, "It's such a peaceful neighborhood. Feels like everyone really looks out for each other here." I smiled. "We try," I said simply. That night, as I sat on my porch under the clear sky, a soft breeze rustling the trees, I reflected on everything that had happened. The conflict, the frustration, the victory, it all seemed like a distant storm now. What remained was calmness and a sense of belonging. The Porsche was long gone, but its memory lingered as a quiet lesson, proof that, even in the most ordinary places, standing up for what's right can change everything. And sometimes, justice arrives not with thunder or rage, but with sunlight, patience, and a tow truck in broad daylight. I took a deep breath, smiling to myself as the stars began to appear. Peace had returned and it was here to stay.